Hello and welcome back to the Football Heritage Podcast. I'm your host, Rory Bryce, and today I'm joined once again by Steven Torres.
Good evening. How are you? Once again, it's always a pleasure.
It's good to have you back on the show, Steven. I'm very well. Thanks very much for joining us once again. I'm also joined by Andy Wilson.
Hey Rory, how you doing?
I'm good, Andy. Thanks very much for coming on the show. And I'm also joined by Edwin Jusino. Thanks very much for joining us. How are you doing today?
Hi, everything's good. Thank you for having me here.
Good. No, it's delightful to have you all on here today. So, for our listeners who aren't aware of this magnificent trio of gentlemen, you'll remember our first podcast of the year focused on the story of the New York Cosmos trip to Cuba in 2015, which Stephen was also a guest on for that. Now, he's brought the rest of his colleagues from ANCCIF, the organisation that he effectively heads up and that we partner with. And we're going to do a bit of an episode, I suppose, sort of around the shared heritage of the CONCACAF nations and what drew all of these guys to that shared history and heritage, but also talk a little bit about what ANCCIF do, because it's actually quite important work. It's work that should be carried on within other organisations, and actually is to some degree over here, particularly at club level. But I guess we're also going to be kind of digging into the reasons why, and the deeper reasons why organisations like this are really important for, kind of association-wide type research into football history and heritage. So it's going to be a pretty in-depth episode, but we're going to get some stories out of these guys as well, because I'm not letting them go without telling us some football history stories from Puerto Rico and Canada, which Edwin and Andy respectively, I suppose, represent within ANCCIF. But Stephen, you've already had a bit of an introduction on this show. Why don't you give our listeners a very brief introduction into what you do at ANCCIF?
Thank you once again for having me here. And this time we are doing the ANCCIF podcast. So I'm very proud to be doing it and joined alongside the first Vice President, Edwin Jusino from Puerto Rico, and along with the General Secretary, Andy Wilson from Canada. As mentioned, I am the president, actually the first president of ANCCIF. And basically it's you could say we're kind of a new organization, but the official name of ANCCIF is the Asociación Norte, Centroamericana y Caribe de Investigadores de Fútbol in Spanish, of course, but in English is the Association of North, Central American, and Caribbean Football Investigators. So that is the official title, in which I am very proud to be the first president elected, and looking forward to answering any questions, and I'm very excited to be here.
Yeah, definitely. I think that's actually quite important as well. I'm actually quite excited to ask you guys a few questions just so that I can get a kind of full understanding of what it is ANCCIF do and have done in the past as well. Next, Andy, General Secretary of ANCCIF, why don't you tell our listeners a little bit about yourself?
Yeah, thanks, Rory. So, as you can probably tell by the accent, I'm not truly Canadian, but I am a citizen of this great white north. And I basically have been doing a lot of research into club soccer in Canada, and that was where Stephen got in touch with me and invited me to join the membership. And from there was an opening for General Secretary, which I took, and now I basically am Stephen's whipping boy. Basically, I'm heading up a lot of the work for the website that we're doing, and the General Secretary arranging the meetings and the committees thereby, and it's just a lot of fun, but it's a lot of hard work.
Yeah, but I mean, it kind of has to be as well. But like you said, that it's fun, and that's what's important about it as well. And it's known that you're putting in miles for what is a very important job. Edwin, why don't you tell our listeners a little bit about you, last but certainly not least?
So I am the executive director of a media outlet down in Puerto Rico called Fútbol. We've been active for 16 years. And aside from that, I also have a PhD in history. So I basically fused my two loves, which is sports and history. And I started researching Caribbean and Puerto Rican football history, which is how I started. I got into, or I was contacted rather by people involved in the formation of ANCCIF, and next thing you know, I'm in the board, and I still don't know how that happened, but it's been an honor to serve. It's been fun to help Steve in his vision, and at the end of the day, I am here to support Steve in his vision of ANCCIF, and to help out in any way possible, whether it be with ideas or any temporary functions that may or may not arisen or risen up in recent times. And as you may notice, my main language is not English, so if I stutter, it's because I'm just thinking right now in Spanish, trying to translate it to English.
I mean, that's kind of important what you've just said is Steve's vision is something that I kind of want to touch on first, because it plays into this kind of idea that I have in my head of ANCCIF. There's a group of like-minded individuals who are looking to explore the football history of North America, the Caribbean, and just the entire sort of CONCACAF region, more or less. That's it at face value. But obviously a lot of people would say, well, why is it they're doing that? Do a lot of these associations not work together with each other? And I think it's probably easy for a lot of people to think that, but it's probably not the point of what ANCCIF are looking to do. And in my mind, it's actually about sharing resources, collaborating with each other on a much more frequent and grander scale, and actually working together to promote the shared heritages that a lot of the nations within CONCACAF actually have with each other, that they might not realise or might not have come forward to the yet or been told in stories so far. So, Steve, why don't you tell us about your vision, and if that is anything close to what it is?
Well, of course. I mean, but before we get into that, I'd probably be best to give you a brief history on how the formation of ANCCIF and what basically brought us all together. You really have to start off with a good portion of the members, well, at least the 27 founding members, as we call them. They were all already part of a WhatsApp chat group. And it was composed of many. I was added to the chat group because many of those members were historians, statisticians, former journalists, or current journalists, everybody that wanted to share historical content and information, stats, whatsoever on WhatsApp chat group. And it came to me after, with another founding member who is currently our second vice president, Eric Lugo from Mexico. So when I came in, I just said to Eric, listen, why don't we try to put everybody together and form something official? Put ourselves together, because we're already, passing along information, disseminating, details, ideas, etc. Why don't we make it official? Why don't we grab this group of 27 that are in this chat and let's put together something? And Eric, who I would say was a good piece in putting the whole organization together. He was actually our first general secretary, and decided, put everybody together. We put it to a democratic, vote, and we all pitched in to put together statues, and we thought about the name, the logo, etc., which came out to be something best to describe what we were doing or what we were planning to do. And going back just to the the English acronym of the Association of North, Central America, and Caribbean Football Investigators, abbreviation ANCCIF. Sometimes for short, we could call ourselves the association. With the 27 founding members, once we had our first official meeting, or the Congress, we were able to finally elect the first board. To my surprise, I didn't think I was going to be elected president, but it was very flattering. I was very happy to have all these members, colleagues that put their trust in me and decided to lead the group. And then everything fell into place with the rest of the members of the board, which are composed by 2 vice presidents, a treasurer, the general secretary, and 4 elected members of each of the zones. When I say 4, I mean because we also have, from the founding members, we did have members from South America. And there are so many tournaments that not just in the North, Central American, and Caribbean region, but they also overlap with a couple of tournaments that involve South American teams, like the Central American Caribbean Games, as well as the Pan American Games, etc. So that's, you could say, it's a brief description of how ANCCIF got started. And to going back to the objectives that we wanted to do is basically very simple, is to establish the historical archive records of football/soccer in North, Central America, and the Caribbean regions through many years, because there have been so many tournaments, both at the national and club level. Disseminate the information derived from the investigation and research in the means that are considered necessary, whether it be physical or electronic. The thing is to cooperate with the safeguard prosperity of interests of individuals and groups research efforts for each of our members in the association, which is ANCCIF. Most of all is to promote the creation of each of the country of the regions of the associations dedicated to the investigation, research, and dissemination of the history of his respective local football/soccer. And we even have bigger goals moving forward. Our formation as an association was on July 8th, 2021, and I think we've come a long way in the last 4 years, but we can even do more.
That's quite interesting, because I think for only being around in 2021, you've already got quite a large following on social media, and obviously, as Andy said there, you're working on your website, so you obviously do have grander ambitions and bigger goals for the association. I mean, just quickly, not to go off on too much of a tangent just yet, have you got someone within the association representing every nation within the region that you're looking to represent?
That is the goal. I'm really surprised as how many members have increased from the 27 founding members. It does cover a good portion of countries in the region. We always welcome more and more.
Yeah, so far we've just received our 43rd member, who is also our second Canadian member, a guy called Richard Scott, who's he actually works for Canada Soccer, and his knowledge is incredible. But obviously, it's going to be a challenge when you look at who are we going to get from, say, the US Virgin Islands and the British Virgin Islands as members. But never say never. One day, it should all work that everyone's represented. That's the goal, as Steven said.
Just need to keep striving towards that. And I suppose from your perspective, Edwin, having a PhD in history, this seems like something that would be right up your street. Of course, given your interest in football as well, you alluded to that when you spoke at the beginning. You're really marrying your two interests, but being able to work with an organisation who are looking to preserve and archive this information, which might not be readily available or even entirely accessible or kept anywhere at all at the moment, it must be great having been able to work with such experienced people and actually bring that experience to the table yourself.
Yes, I will say yes to everything. Particularly, I just wanted to point out that there's a reason why it's investigators of football.
It's a good question, actually.
And it's because when you look at the different areas that our different members cover, not all of them could be considered historians in the academic sense, right? So, but you can be an investigator if you're a statistician or a journalist or any of these other branches. So in that sense, I think I made my point in the early debates that we should try to focus it on being an investigators in general, so that it could be all encompassing and not just historians. When you asked somebody in academia, they might not consider somebody a historian for X or Y reason. So in that sense, I am really pleased with the way that the association has been moving forward, and I am really excited for the new website and the work that we're doing in terms of archival, particularly because there is very few depositories or archival depositories that are easily accessible for general public, students, historians, journalists, etc., to gain, to be able to go and know where those documents are going to be at. So if when you're doing research or you're doing, I can tell you in my case, when I was doing my PhD research, one of the things that was valued for me, that had valued, was that here we have like a small museum that does have a lot of documents per se. So it was an easy access, but in terms of other nations, it's very hard, and whether it be because of geographic distances, the cost of having to having to fly to la hemeroteca of some newspaper in Mexico or in the States, or having to buy access to a digital compendium of old newspapers, in at least in the English language. But here's the other interesting problem that we have, and that goes into the heritage part. CONCACAF is not just Spanish and English. You have Creole, you have Dutch, you have French. So not all results are going to be covered. I can give you an example from Puerto Rican history. In up to before I joined ANCCIF, we had a lot of games missing from a lot of information missing from our records, because when Puerto Rico went out to play internationally as a visitor, usually they didn't send someone. So the result, we may have had the result, but not necessarily the goal scorers and whatnot. If this is not, when you're talking about at least competitions that aren't FIFA, like the World Cup. So aside from that, you would have a lot of missing data. So if you can get people talking from the different islands with people in Central America or North America, or even the part of CFU that is South America, then you can start filling in the gaps from where local information doesn't reach.
If I can just add a little bit to what Edwin was saying, is that basically each of our members obviously is a historian in their own respective way, in their respective countries or zone, island, wherever. And basically they all will always put the country that they represent as ANCCIF members as the first priority of the information they're going to obtain. So the key thing is to get everybody together, because I can have some information from a certain event, a certain tournament, and then somebody else may be having some missing pieces from those games. Then you put it together and you try to combine to officially, complete the research, complete the investigation, because we are investigators of these details, and to complete the tournament, because you'd be surprised how many missing holes are there in many events and many competitions. And we're just talking about tournaments that, quote unquote, are official, but there have been many, friendly events, friendly competition, and you've got so many missing holes. The key thing that I wanted to add on that part is that because when I came aboard, I wanted to make sure that we had everybody on the same page. And in doing so, it's okay that you're doing your own research in your own respective countries, but if you're a part of one of I was able to, with the approval of the board, create an investigation committees, which are 4 of them. men's football / youth, women's football competitions and events in youth. You have club tournaments, and then the fourth one at the moment is a combined futsal and beach soccer, with each of them having a chairman for each of those committees. And their purposes is to get every details that they can find and start completing each and every one of the tournaments in their respective competitions. An example I could give you, Eric Lugo, once again mentioned earlier from Mexico, our third vice president. He is the chairman of the men's football competition and youth. He's been doing a great job on, filling in the gaps on many of the tournaments. Of course, they're not, we would wish we would have it 100%. When I mean filling up the gaps, we're talking about the rosters of each of the teams, if you're able to get every position on it, if you're able to get date of birth, so you get all those details to complete the rosters for all of them. Coaches, if you're able to get the delegation, even better. And then once you have the rosters, then you're able to complete the match reports or the games, each and every one of them. The lineups, the referees, the scorers, substitutions depending on the years, and then the cautions and the sent off red cards. So once you have that complete information, then the tournament is complete. You go to the next one. So, Eric Lugo has done a very good job on his part. I am the chairman of the club as well as the futsal and beach soccer. So it's also a process. I've decided to chair also the futsal beach soccer because they were new sports. You would say being able to put together too, because yes, I love the sport of futsal, but I've always been following it thoroughly, so I could oversee it. The same thing with beach soccer. For the club tournament, there's so many events, so many competitions, but within the region, the main one being the champ now is again called the Champions Cup, which is a very historical tournament played between the regions here in the North Central America and the Caribbean. So it has a lot of history, and believe me, there are a lot of holes, a lot of games missing, especially in certain areas in competitions. So I try to encourage each and every one of our members to be a part of each of these respective committees to try to assist, because you'd be surprised. I mean, another example I can give you is that sometimes, certain lineups from a certain game, you can find it in one of the respective countries that hosted the game, or one of the other teams may have it. So it's like a gold mine when you're trying to, I just found, a roster from a so-and-so team. And I know that Edwin and Andy also share my information because, it's like a gold mine. Like you just found a treasure and you want to have it, and you want to make sure that it's complete and ready. And then you have the official information because, sometimes people or fans or even media want to go to certain websites and they want to find out, historical information or historical stats. And sometimes it's very difficult to find because not everything is on the website. So that's, a little bit I wanted to add to what Edwin was stating. And that's pretty much what we have been working as a group. Just because you're from a so-and-so country doesn't necessarily mean that you're just going to be dealing with just that specific country. You're there to assist and help us all in trying to complete the task, which the investigative committees have, is each and every one of those respective tournaments from those levels.
Yeah, I'm with you. What's quite, I suppose, interesting from my perspective is that I feel like, obviously, if you want to talk about us in terms of a project, I would say we're probably based in Scotland and the rest of the UK, because that's where most of our regular contributors from, or our WhatsApp chat, basically. But obviously, I'm Scotland based. And I think over here, there's a real sort of malaise amongst football historians in particular that they really take for granted the wealth of records and stats that we have. And that doesn't translate when they research other nations or they research other associations. So, for example, one of the conversations that I had with a man from Lebanon called Maroon Mahfoud, who was effectively tasked with building an archive for the Lebanese Football Association from the ground up. That included a women's football archive in what eventually would become a museum. So a huge task. That was in 2023 when I spoke with him. And one of his sort of primary objectives was to find out what the crest was for Lebanon's first football team. They didn't even have that on record. And a lot of people would hear that and they would say, oh, that's mind-blowing. How have they not got this? But you'd probably find that it's more common than not for a lot of countries to actually not have these records. And it's actually just something that we take for granted. And, I don't know if it's because, football originated in Scotland and England and all this kind of a thing. So our records are really good. I don't know, but it's those kind of mentalities that I think have kind of stalled a lot of football research and held it up in many ways. So, for example, another conversation that I had with, it's not really the Football Association, the Tourist Bureau of Tristan da Cunha, the small island group that's technically, I think, part of Africa, but lies sort of midway between the African continent and South America. And I got in touch with them asking about their football team. Now, their football team was called Edinburgh of the Seven Seas Football Club. So very, very romantic. Bit of a mouthful, doesn't really roll off the tongue. And, I mean, it was a bit of a shame because they used to play teams from different ships that would come into dock, whether they were dropping off supplies or whatever else. And then they would sometimes fly over to play in a sort of inter-island league. But of course, this is the most remote island chain in the world. It's not going to be cheap. It's not going to be effective or pragmatic to continuously do that. So they had to drop down into becoming a five-a-sides team. But because everything is so centralised and remote on this island, they have all of the records in one building. And that's where they're kept. So they were able to provide me with photos and everything else. And I think there's an element of that as well, where a lot of places you may think to yourself, oh, they won't be able to tell me anything about football. They surely can't have a football team. Actually, they might have one of the biggest wealth of resources in the world for football because they're so isolated and so remote. They've been able to keep everything, and they kind of maybe not so much see it as their duty or see the importance of it more so than others, but they're just able to preserve everything a bit more effectively as opposed to other nations. So it's about breaking down those mentalities and actually saying to people, there's a lot of research that's still to be done here. And actually, despite what you might think, this isn't just something that's completely for people who live within or represent nations within CONCACAF. If you're from somewhere over the world and your nation has played a friendly against that nation, you might have some information that they need. And that's where this kind of idea of a shared heritage comes from, for me anyway.
I agree 100%. Just a quick example I could give you is that sometimes, the information that one sees may not be the most accurate one. And the example I'll give you is that, I did spend almost a decade as pretty much the main communication person at CONCACAF. And for many years, obviously, I tried to piece together each and every one of the historical tournaments, and there was a section on the old site that the first, I would say glamorous site, but it was a site where, you had each and every one of the tournaments, and at least you had the scores of each of the games from every competition, every little competition, even the Centroamerican, Caribbean, and Pan American games, tournaments that really do not follow or fall under the jurisdiction of CONCACAF, but the teams to compete in there. So going back to the Champions Cup, I remember for many years, off the top of my head, the 1976 final between Club Deportivo Águila of El Salvador and SV Robin Hood of Suriname. There was only one game, and it ended 5-1, the final. And then after doing some research, I said, wait a second. I know in the latter part of my years at CONCACAF, I was able to piece together the mystery. There was a second game. So for many years, they only had one game listed on the CONCACAF archives, and they played two games. The second game ended, 3-2, and that was in overtime. So the overall aggregate score was 8-3. Aguila was still the champion, but you see my point that there was a game missing. So it's just one of the examples of things that were missing in some competitions. I mean, I'll even add Andy into this mix right now because we're going to talk about Canadian clubs. When they decided to launch the CONCACAF Champions League first time around, they were going to give a birth to the Canadian Soccer Association because they were crowning their first ever. I think it was they called it the Neutral Light Canadian Soccer Championship. I think that was the sponsor the first time around. Andy can correct me if I'm wrong, but it was the first time ever. You know, the 3 Canadian teams at the times. 2 of them, I think, were playing in MLS at the time. 1 was not at the moment, and they would crown their champion, and that team would qualify as the Canadian representative. I remember having the conversations. Oh, it would be the first time a Canadian team competes in the Champions Cup. Wrong. It was wrong. There were 2 club teams that actually played games representing Canada at the CONCACAF Champions Cup. Those types of informations, you know, you can find it possibly in key details in Canada somewhere, because I know there's somewhere out there. But the 2 teams being, of course, correct me if I'm wrong, Toronto, Italia, and the Serbian White Eagles from Toronto. Those were the 2 teams that, you know, represented Canada in the Champions Cup. So, you know, there was some history before, you know, you had Toronto FC or Montreal Impact advancing to the tournament. So it was very fascinating to try to piece together those details. And that's what, you know, mostly what we do. There's so many missing pieces. It's just, it makes it a challenge, but it's a good challenge for historians to do.
I have some information or something to add to that. For example, in Puerto Rico, back in 2011, the Federation celebrated the 100 years of football in the island. And it was weird that it was 1911, right? If you think about it, Spain already had football or soccer before 1911. While Puerto Rico was still a colony, we still, you know, there was soccer already inserted into Spain. So the theory always was that there had to have been soccer before 1911. So years pass, and I am actually in the middle of the pandemic, doing research online. I managed to buy a subscription to I think it was newspapers.com. And all of a sudden, in 1905, in a newspaper it was like a local regional newspaper, a very one of the few newspapers that started coming out after the invasion happened. And in this newspaper, there is basically an ad. It's not an article. It's an ad calling for people interested in basically a tryout for the Ponce Association Football Club in 1905. So
wow,
there goes, that basically proved my theory, and I was, very happy.
Oh, I bet you were very happy. You proved everybody wrong, and that's the whole point.
I basically proved everybody wrong.
That is groundbreaking, isn't it? That's new information. Like that completely changes the script, really, and that's what research is supposed to do.
Yeah, but this is not just the point of proving people wrong. The key thing is to give the most accurate information, because you'd be surprised. I mean, there's so many flaws and so many, missing pieces. I mean, why did this game take place at this venue? Why was this game only played one half or 50 minutes or 67 minutes? Why was I'm just throwing out ideas of certain things that have happened without specifically putting out, it was this game, this game, this game. I mean, there've been World Cup qualifiers that happened this way. There've been Olympic qualifiers that were decided with a coin toss, my friend. A coin toss. because they didn't go to the penalty. They didn't have PKs at as the option. You know what I mean? You had so many different scenarios. Okay, you had a club team winning a tournament. Okay, on the goal differential. No, on the goal scored average, which another criteria. The key thing is to make the most information accurate so that everybody has the right details. Because I could give you a long list, and we don't want to, take up all the time here at the podcast. There's so many differences. Is one example, as Edwin has just pointed out, it could be misinterpreted. You've got so many things. The key thing is we want to check the facts, make sure they're accurate, and give you the proper information. Because the last thing you want to see is somebody else saying, no, this couldn't have happened this way. Why did this game was played this way? Why was there, this team had to leave because they had certain, criterias, or they forfeited the game? Is the score stands? Was there a fight or brawl? I know there was a huge pitch invasion that Toronto Serbian White Eagles game against the Rayados, of Monterrey, that happened in Toronto. That was their second leg game. That game, ended for years. People thought it ended in a 1-1 draw during that Champions Cup. And then we later found out from another key historian that no, there was a protest, and CONCACAF did give the game a 1-0 victory to Monterrey because of the pitch invasion, because there was a fight. You see what I mean?
Well, I'm gonna come to Andy next, because one thing I just wanted to say on top of that, when you mentioned things like, why did a game stop at 56 minutes, for example, a lot of these things can actually teach us, and this is what one of our earlier episodes this year was actually about, was how looking at football through different lenses, whether it's history, heritage, sociology, whatever, can actually teach us so much about the context of the places and the people at the time. So, for example, an article that's going to be going out on our website soon, if it hasn't already done so, is going to be about the history of football in the Seychelles in Africa. And up until, I think, 1940, they played their matches only as an hour, and it was 2 30-minute halves. And then they switched to the 90 minutes. So it's different things like that as well that we can actually learn from football history in different countries. But we always need to bear in mind and keep an open mind to learn as well about the different socio-political and economic situations that were happening in those nations at the time as well. But Andy, to come to you, because obviously Canada's a really interesting one for me. Obviously, Galt FC was probably one of my favourite episodes that we've done on this show. Obviously, the Olympic pioneering team of Canada, and what Mark Anderton's doing there now to revive the heritage of that club and use it to promote community soccer now is absolutely fantastic. You'll have some stories yourself, and I want you to tell them. But one thing that I did want to ask, first of all, is that when you're working with your investigations, and I've always wondered if this is something that you guys have done or something that's been brought to your attention before, what about underrepresented peoples, indigenous peoples across the Americas, and First Nations peoples, particularly for, I suppose, specific for Canada? Have you ever come across any sort of football leagues or any football involvement from those communities before? Is it something that ANCCIF is looking to do more of in the future, or is it a case that football in communities don't really exist due to the circumstances that these communities were subjugated to?
Well, historically, it was mainly, from my research, it was the Brits coming over. As with everything else, they take over the world. But I've not really come across any. But out in BC, for sure, there has been in recent times quite a few First Nations teams have cropped up in, like the Vancouver Island Soccer League and Vancouver Metro Soccer League, and there's some still playing now, some have gone, and they're probably still playing in youth level, but I'm not 100% sure, so don't quote me on that. But it's mainly been the influx of immigrants coming over that really kick-started the game. be more than the First Nations, because obviously, I mean, we know that the First Nations got a really bad hand for a good chunk of time, and for a lot of the time, sadly, they still are. So I've not come across any. I would love to. I would love to find out more about it. But I say it's mainly, as Steven said, I mean, it's the diasporas that have come over, like the Serbian White Eagles, Toronto Italia, Toronto Scottish, Toronto Irish. You know, I mean, that's from the past for sure. I mean, Toronto Scottish had the Toronto Ulster United, sorry. That's like one of the main ones. Like they've had their own stadium, which is houses now, unfortunately. And from what I can tell, there isn't even a plaque saying that there was a big stadium there, which is sad. But and like they hosted Glasgow Rangers. I mean, the footage is on YouTube to see. So, like you say, the First Nations, other than in recent history, I can't attest to there not being, but I've not come across any as of yet.
No, that's okay. I mean, I was just curious to know that, and again, I suppose it's part of research that I'd done when I was doing my degree and things like that. I was looking into, underrepresented communities, how we tell their stories in sensitive ways and ways which are inclusive, etc., etc. But it did get me thinking about football amongst these communities, and I've spoken to people before about football within the Romani or traveller community. And, it just crossed my mind whether or not these were things that were set up and existed, or if you had any knowledge of that at this point. But, I mean, there must be so many other stories from Canada that you've researched and actually found out about yourself to actually bring to ANCCIF and kind of change how people are looking at soccer in Canada. Because at the moment, I'd probably say Canadian soccer is getting pretty big just now, particularly with a lot of the players that are coming through academies and club level and moving on to Europe.
Oh, yeah, absolutely. I mean, the club scene's thriving. What a lot of people may not know is that it's actually a year-round sport. In BC, they're coming to the end of their winter leagues in BC because obviously they're blessed with a lot nicer weather than the 3 feet of snow that I've just received. But yeah, so like the Vancouver Island Soccer League, the Vancouver Metro, the Fraser Valley, Burnaby Metro, all the ladies' leagues out there, they're all coming to a close, coming to their cup competitions now. But it's like you were saying earlier about how in the UK, because coming from Merseyside, obviously a huge soccer hotbed, and like when I moved, this is what got me interested in the history of Canadian soccer. Was I was sat in Labrador of all places, and I'm trying to find out about soccer, and there was just nothing. Like, it's very scattergun. I mean, my history site is scattergun as well, because it basically reflects what the history of it's like. I mean, and with you saying earlier as well about, with Steven saying about the changes and finding different things, I can't tell you the amount of match reports or match results that I've had on the website, and then I've found another article and it's completely changed the date, or it's changed the result, or it's changed the venue. It's a massive country, as we know, and even today, I mean, the most accurate soccer reporting you'll find is not through the mainstream media in Canada. It's through people who do great work like Walk in the Red and things like that, who are independents, who go to the games, and they're out there online and they're doing so much better work than the mainstream does. Like you can open the Toronto Sun and you may get a few columns on the TFC game, and that's about it. You won't get hardly anything basically in mainstream media, unless Canada's playing, and they're only jumping on the bandwagon because of how well we've been doing.
Yeah, I mean, I will say from the outside looking in, Canada in particular, it does seem pretty fractured the soccer history in terms of what people know, and a lot of it is down to independent researchers and investigators like yourself who are actually digging into it of your own volition, you know, in your own free time, free of charge. That is what you guys are doing, and that's what's leading to these new findings and new research that's coming through. I wanted to ask you, because it's an issue, I suppose, probably across the world in terms of early records particularly, but would you say that there's a reason behind why there's such a deficit across CONCACAF at all, or is it something that you feel is quite reflective of the majority of places in world soccer?
I can't speak for most of the CONCACAF nations, obviously, but I can tell you from Canada, I mean, the general malaise about soccer has been ingrained for a long time. I mean, once it was probably before the Second World War, there was a lot more stories and newspaper articles and everything because of the Brits and the Irish and everyone else that came over. And then it just fell downhill. And then you got like the Canadian Soccer League, which is still going in its own small form now, which was all the different diasporas, and they fell out of favour because of match fixing and everything. And now it only seems really the mainstream media jump on the bad news stories, the same as the world over. I mean, Canada soccer never had so much recognition as it got over this drone gate at the Olympics, where everyone was talking about it, and not for the right reasons. It was completely lost in the fact that you had an Olympic team out there that defied all the odds to qualify, even to get out the group stage after they'd been hammered so hard. But all they wanted to talk about was how Canada have cheated, and it's always, it seems to have been that way for a long time. Like the match fixing in the CSL, there's a lot, you can find out a lot about that, but you can't find a lot about the matches of that year.
Yeah.
And it's sad, but that's the way of the media.
Yeah, I'd agree with you there.
Yeah, that's one thing that we can't control the media and what they cover. We can only provide, especially during the time that I was the media officer for CONCACAF, was to provide them the best information possible for them to do their job. One of the things that I did was, having done all the research for all the respective tournaments, is that every time I had a tournament to go down and cover from a media operations standpoint, I was able to put together a nice, simple, not so glamorous media kit or media guide for each tournament. So every tournament I had that took place, let it be men's Olympic qualifying, women's Olympic qualifying, under 20s, under 17s, futsal, beach soccer, they had something that had the rosters, that had details of the history of the event, if there was one, so that the media, that local media that was there, let it be if I was in Guatemala, if I was in Costa Rica, if I was in Canada, if I was in Mexico, or in different parts of the States, you had something to cover. And it was a key piece because it was, the most accurate at the time information to provide. And, it's really much up for the media to cover in that extent. So it is something that, it just depends on what they want to cover and what they want to do.
I can give you more examples on just the Canadian media. Like we've got the Canadian Premier League, and you'll be hard pushed to find a Forge FC or a York United report in any of the Toronto papers, never mind the National Post or the Globe and Mail. You've got the League One Canada, it's kind of a step 3. And you've got the League One Ontario, Quebec, BC, and Alberta, and the champions of those go into the Canadian Championship. And the best example I can give you is my team, Simcoe County Rovers. They won the league 2 years ago. So last season, they were in the Canadian Championship, got the most incredible draw away at Toronto FC at BMO Field. I looked and it was like, wow, we've really hit the big time. We got one column in the Toronto Star saying that we were going to be playing TFC, and that was it.
As the only editor-in-chief of this group
Mm.
of a actual soccer specific media, I agree in the sense that there has to be a balance. You can't just always be bringing up negative stories and all the juicy gossip and all this, even though that may be the something that draws a lot of readers. But you also need to do the old fashioned give results and cover all of the leagues and give them coverage, because at the end of the day, when you're talking about football or soccer, the extra pitch stuff might be interesting, but at the end of the day, what is the most important aspect are the 22 players in the pitch and what they're doing and what's going on inside the pitch. So if there's any other journalist or aspiring journalists out there, my recommendation would be to, yes, we need to keep accountable the people, the authorities, and all this. And when there's injustice, you need to write about that. But at the end of the day, if you're going into sports, the most important aspect of sports is, at the end of the day, the game. So if you're not covering the game, you're not delving into the most important aspects. So you're cutting away something that is key. I can give you an example in terms of Puerto Rico. Locally here, the most newspapers don't cover local soccer for X or Y reasons. They don't. They stop covering the day-to-day soccer. I would say around 10 to 6 or 7 years ago, and it has fallen on us, the independent media, to actually cover all the games or try to cover all the games to the best of our abilities. But at the end of the day, the people that get the more spotlight or the more importance is always going to be the local journalists of the mainstream media. That's why France Football gives only people from a newspaper that doesn't follow the day-to-day local newspaper, local Puerto Rican football. The vote for the Ballon d'Or. So it's just it's hard, and I understand the frustrations that people may have in regards to soccer coverage, but independent media at the end of the day will always have more coverage because we're more invested in it.
Yeah, that's true. One thing that I think kind of comes hand in hand with the media in a way, and it's quite easy for people to forget this actually. Do you guys think that associations should be doing more to look back and preserve the heritage of the countries that they represent? Because I think people often forget that football associations aren't just these static bureaucratic entities that push paper. They're very, very political, and they're very interpolitical with the associations they communicate with the most as well. We could spend another podcast going into the challenges and the reasons why associations may or may not look to preserve their history, but do you think that in terms of just a system with, for example, your investigations and your research, do you think associations can be doing more to actively promote and preserve what is effectively the story of how they came to be?
Oh, absolutely. Absolutely. I mean, again, I'm not going to speak for every member of ANCCIF, but I mean, in my end, it has to be something that if you have the resources, because, it depends on the association. Some associations do a better job than others. I'm not speaking just in the region of North Central America and the Caribbean, but, we're talking about in a global state. Now, I know a lot has changed into that extent, and it's a key factor because, people want to know what happened in so-and-so competitions. Not just the fans, but also the media or the stakeholders. If they want to do a promotion on a certain or marketing on a certain team, they want to know what the team has done in its history and is it worth investing. So I'm just throwing out ideas, but yes, I mean, it just depends on if you have the legwork and the manpower to do so. Some associations do have, in conjunction with their federation association, they do have recognition, Hall of Fame or what have you. And it's something that they try to cherish their history. Now, if you're going to go into the politics and what can be done, what is not done, you have to understand that, most of the national soccer associations are under a banner of a confederation, and which also reports to FIFA. So there could be some games that they do not acknowledge as national team, but a historian would see, wait a second, this is something occur. I'll go back to my time at U.S. Soccer. I mean, when I came in at U.S. Soccer, there were so many games that were being reconstructed or to fit the requirement that FIFA had requested each and every out their respective national association. They had to make sure that it was your A team playing against another A team. If it's not the case, then it's not considered an A international. Very simple. So both teams have to agree. Both the national associations have to agree. Yes, it was my A team. If one does not agree, then it's not considered an international A game. So they do have that structure. But like I said, sometimes in some countries, some historians want their federation or their association to do more. And sometimes they can't.
Yeah, sure, I understand. It's one of those things. I mean, there's another example that I can think of it was a book that I was reading recently, and he was talking about his father's attempts to retrospectively claim a Scotland cap. I didn't actually know this until I read it, but the Scottish Football Association didn't actually hand out caps to players if they hadn't played one of the home nations. So if the fixture didn't include England, Wales, or North of Ireland, then they wouldn't be given a cap. And even if they were given a cap, they would be given a cap for the entire group of fixtures played there instead of just one fixture. So players would often only have, if they'd represented Scotland for, say, for example, 20 years of their career, they might only have 5 or 6 caps. So it's really, really strange how some associations choose to do things, and then the reasons why they choose not to do things as well. And again, it's always important to put it into that context. But just before we finish up for tonight, I just wanted to ask you guys all individually, and I suppose as a group as well, what your individual plans are within ANCCIF, what your next batch of research is hoping to discover, or what your next batch of research is hoping to prove, and what the goals for ANCCIF are for 2025.
My immediate goals for ANCCIF is to get this website up and running, and hopefully, we will increase the membership of ANCCIF, and as you said earlier, hopefully we can get as close to a full house, if you like, of countries with members. That's my immediate my hope for the future, is for all of the games and respective statistics and what have you to be unearthed, and we've got 100% success rate. That's never going to happen probably, but I would love for it to happen, and for myself just to keep on going and finding out as much about Canadian club soccer as I can.
You'll surely have a big influx coming from Greenland soon, you'd hope, whether it be members or information, as well as the newest member of CONCACAF.
I would love that, and I would love to go to Greenland. I'd love to go to Greenland just to see a game.
Yeah, me too.
That'd be quite the story to tell.
My goals in terms of ANCCIF for this year would be for it to continue growing, in all in all in all directions, particularly in membership, particularly in women membership. We need more women to be involved, not just in the collection of men's game, but also in the women's game. I know that there's like a lot of women out there that used to play in the 60s and 70s, and that information has, for X or Y reason, not been easily accessible. So I would love for the association to have more women that will be interested in researching women's soccer. That would be my goal for now.
Yeah, no, that's a really important one actually as well, and one that it gets brought up in this podcast quite a lot actually is the inclusion of women historians and heritage professionals within the field, working towards these shared goals. So yeah, I think that's a really, really important one actually.
I would want an increase in membership, of course, both male and female. I know there are many more historians, statisticians in the region, and it also covers, we do have members in South America as well. The key thing is that we want to open the door to many more, including the partnership that we have with Football Heritage, much more partnerships elsewhere. We want to grow as an association. We want to be recognized as an association that you can come to us to do the research, to provide the correct information, but we also want to expand it not just to our website, hopefully that we will be launching, fingers crossed later this year, but also not just in our social media platforms, but maybe in the future, have a place where we can have all this details. I know there, some members wanted to have a museum, a location where it could be. That can be up for debate, but that's something from a long-term project. So I do have a lot of faith in the group. There are some challenges in trying to get the details and the information that we normally like to cover. But the key thing here is that you got to have patience. One of the things that I've learned during my time working, especially in the field that I work in, you have to have patience, especially when you're dealing with other people. And the key thing is that, we have a good group of historians that, say it's almost doubled in size from the founding members from 2021. We're looking for more, and we just want to, make sure that we have the right details and the right information to be able to pass on to everyone that requested, the third parties, the stakeholders, etc. So I know it's a challenge, but we just have to be patient. They'll take the typical cliche, Rome wasn't built in a day.
I mean, that's it. I mean, you're basically building a regional-wide archive, in some cases from the ground up. So it is going to be challenging. It is going to be very difficult, but that's what's important about working collaboratively with people and organisations from other associations and nations, is that you're not going to be able to do this by yourself. You're not going to be able to do this just with people from one association. You need to work collaboratively, and of course, as you mentioned, that's where the kind of patience aspect comes into it as well. But, and I suppose in terms of our plans as well, because I don't think we've really had a chance to explain to much of our listener base or people on social media what our partnership will actually entail out with, obviously, podcasts. And I guess from my perspective, it was to sort of take some of the stories and information and research that you guys have done and give it a place where you can talk about it, whether that be through our website and articles or on the podcast like you guys have done just now. Also, and selfishly, it's a chance for me to hear cool football stories, and that's always great fun. So, I'm delighted about that. but it's also for us to network, for you guys to network with the people that we're in touch with for information that we might have, and for us, again, just to work together so that we can kind of push forward with all this. Obviously, I've got a background within research, so I've made it clear that if you need assistance with anything, we can do that. I've made it clear to you guys, if you need a place to publish articles in Spanish, for instance, then our website's available to do that as well. So there's a lot of aspects that, although it's nothing overly official or set in stone, really what it is just us working together for the benefit of the research that you guys are doing and for the stories that we want to tell through our different outlets. And at the end of the day, that's what I really see heritage and history research as being, is people working together to really platform each other's work and success in research.
No, it's great. I think the more that we can, pass on, the better. I know each and every one of our members has, they can have their own respective library of research articles, stories that they want to tell and that they want to publish. And we're really looking forward and excited with this partnership with you guys at Football Heritage. And yes, we are available at any time that you want us to provide the details. And thank you for allowing this opportunity, and of course, taking the time out of your busy schedule, of course, to have this podcast as well.
No, I mean it's no problem at all. I mean it's I don't know what the word would be. It's a niche interest that I have, but I enjoy it nonetheless. And having conversations with people across the world is what makes it interesting and fun for me. But also just to thank you guys for the opportunity to partner with you and give us access to such a vast resource and network of information for us to have these conversations and to platform them. So it's going to be a really great partnership, and I'm really looking forward to working with you guys more in the future. But as for tonight, that'll do us, I think. Thank you very much, guys, for coming on. I know we're all joining from roughly the same time zone, bar myself, I think. So not too spread out, but we're tuning in from 4 different countries, which is doesn't always happen and isn't always the easiest to organise. So thank you very much for dedicating your time to come on tonight. Of course, to all of our listeners, hope you enjoyed this episode. Thank you once again for listening in. If there's anything related to football history or heritage that you want us to cover, then please do get in touch. You can DM us on X, that's @_footyheritage, or you can email us at hello@footballheritage.co.uk. So if you've got an article that you want to submit or an idea for a podcast you want to suggest, just get in touch. We'll have a chat and we'll see if it's something that we can fit in with the project. But for now, Stephen, say goodbye.
Thank you once again. Good night. We're looking forward to many more podcasts with you.
Definitely, me too. Andy, say goodbye.
Good night. Bye, everyone. Thanks for tonight, Rory. Don't get a good night's sleep.
That's exactly what I'm off to do. And finally, Edwin, say goodnight.
Muy buenas noches a todos y gracias por sintonizar el Football Heritage. Esperemos que podamos seguir colaborando con ustedes y que nos podamos seguir escuchando en el futuro.
Brilliant. Thank you very much. And it's a good night from me as well. We'll see you all again in the next episode. Goodbye.